welcome to Twin Peaks Unwrapped. I'm your host, Ben Durant, and beside me is...
Brian Kazaska.
So, Brian, there was this show back in the 60s called The Prisoner, and this month is the 50th anniversary of the show.
Oh, wow. I got to watch it still. And if you haven't watched it, there's going to be some spoilers.
Today we're going to be talking about Beck and Eeson from the Time for Cakes and Ale podcast, and they also have a podcast on The Prisoner and on Twin Peaks. And we're also going to be talking to Chris Rodley. He's the guy who did Lynch on Lynch book. Great book. I use it almost every week, it seems. And I'm so excited to be having this. So this is really focused on The Prisoner. And then we'll have Chris Rodley on again to talk a little more about Lynch.
What's the name of this place?
You're new here, aren't you?
Where?
Do you want breakfast?
Where is this?
The village?
Yes.
I'll see if coffee's ready.
Where's the police station?
There isn't one.
Can I use your phone?
Oh, we haven't got one.
Where can I make a call?
Well, there's a phone box around the corner.
Thank you.
All right, we're on the show with Eeson and Becks from Time for Cakes and Ale podcast. Hello.
Hi.
Hello, hi.
First, it's really cool to talk with another Twin Peaks podcast, which
Yeah.
you guys are great. Tell me, how did you guys get started in podcasts? Because you have 3 podcasts.
That's right. Well, it was a couple of years ago we started thinking about doing a podcast, just talking about stuff that we love, really. So, like film, TV, comics, books, gaming, everything. And that's where the Time for Cakes and Ale podcast initially came from. And we were going for about a year, just, talking about stuff that we love and putting out episodes when we had stuff that we wanted to talk about. And then Twin Peaks came back, and we knew that we wanted to talk about that endlessly. So we began the Time for Cherry Pie and Coffee stream to cover all the Twin Peaks stuff. And then last September, the 50th anniversary of The Prisoner first airing in the UK came around. And it was perfect timing, really, because Twin Peaks Return was just coming to an end, and we were thinking about what to do next with all this spare time we'd suddenly have. Now we weren't talking about Twin Peaks every week. So we thought, why not start talking about The Prisoner? And we began last September with a series of episodes that were interviews with people who were connected with the show in some way, people who'd written about it or people who loved it. And then this year we decided, well, why not just do every episode of The Prisoner in depth, talking about it as much as we want. So that's what we're doing at the moment. We're putting out fortnightly episodes talking about each of the 17 original episodes of The Prisoner. And it's perfect timing, really, because now, as you say, the 50th anniversary of the first US broadcast has come around.
Brian here, like Twin Peaks, he has never seen The Prisoner before.
Never seen The Prisoner, no.
How can you guys explain The Prisoner to him?
The Prisoner is a show about a character who we know as Number 6, who has a job as some high-ranking government-associated official in London, and he resigns from this job and he prepares to go away on a holiday somewhere. But as the opening episode, Arrival, reveals, and indeed it's repeated in the opening titles of every episode, whilst he's packing his briefcase and ready to go, a sort of black hearse pulls up outside his house. A guy with a top hat comes to his door, pumps it full of gas that knocks him out, and Number 6, he collapses. And when he wakes up, he is initially in his room, in his house in London. But when he goes to the window, he looks outside and he realizes that although the room he's in is the same as his house back home, he's actually looking out in a place known only as the Village, which is completely alien to him. It's like a quaint, almost holiday resort-like place, with complete strangers running the place. He has no idea how he got there, why he's there, but he knows it's a place where people are kept prisoner for various reasons, often related to what they may have done in their former life. And whilst he's there, the village overlords, who are often led by a character who rotates in most of the episodes, who is called Number 2, is there to try and break him and find out exactly why he's resigned. And at the same time, Number 6 tries to learn more about the village and essentially try and find ways to break out himself and return back home. That kind of describes it.
Yeah,
That's probably the most concise I've ever been. I'm
thought-
sorry it went on for a
I
while.
thought that was an
Yeah.
excellent description of the show. I think that
I
was
liked
really
it.
I will not make any deals with you. I've resigned. I will not be pushed, filed, stamped, indexed, briefed, debriefed, or numbered. My life is my own.
Is it?
50 years ago, he was talking about you can't be a prisoner to society, and yet it's so crazy that it's still true today. And I think about Facebook, and you're always giving away your information and stuff. And Patrick McGowan, who was the star, and he directed some of them, and he wrote it, and he was so involved with it. I think he was really trying to say that you you have to have freedom.
What do you want? Information. Whose side are you on? That would be telling. We want information. 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 You won't get it. By hook or by crook, we will. Who are you? The new number 2. Who is number 1? You are number 6. I am not a number. I am a free man.
In the very first episode in Arrival, he has this wonderful early exchange with the number 2 who's there at the time, where number 2 is running through everything they know about his life, where he was born, where he grew up. They've got photographs of him in his house. They know everything about him. And at one point he exclaims that the one thing they don't know is the precise time of his birth. So he fills it in for them because they have all this mountain of biographical information, and he tries to make the point that you might know all this stuff about me, but you will not know what is inside my head. I'm not going to give you that information. I'm not going to tell you why I resigned. It's the one piece of information that they clearly think that if they can break him and make him reveal that one piece of information, then they'll have him and everything else will follow. And he knows that he has to keep that to himself if he's ever going to survive in this place.
Beautiful day.
They didn't settle for ages. Now they wouldn't leave for the world.
You mean you brought them around to your way of thinking?
They had a choice. Wait! Wait! Be still! Turn back!
Can you talk about, is it Rover? What's the white balloon that chases people?
Yeah, so The Prisoner is filled with some really iconic features. I mean, the village itself is very well known. The costume, so number 6's blazer, which is like a dark brown, almost black blazer with white piping. Rover is one of the the really classic iconic things about it. It's a large, well, it was actually a large weather balloon. In The Prisoner, it seems to represent some kind of sort of security system that exists. So everywhere number 6 goes, he's being watched by the number 2 and also usually the supervisor as well. And they're watching things on giant screens all the time. They're seeing exactly where he's going. And whenever he gets too far, often he tries and makes a break for it by sea, they will issue an orange alert. And from the bottom of the sea, this white balloon thing will just kind of bubble up, form and pop up on the surface of the water. And it will chase him around. And it does it on land as well. It'll sometimes appear out of nowhere around a corner in the village and just sort of bounce around, following him around. It's a weird thing because it is just a weather balloon.
Yeah.
But it's one of the most terrifying things. It's just like this amorphous mass that is ever present and sort of has a ceaseless energy just to keep going. And it has this weird cult of people who follow him as well, because in a couple of scenes you see really strange things, like just for one shot. It's
in Free For All.
In Free For All, yeah. There's a scene for no reason where number 6 goes into a cave where he finds Rover, and it's just surrounded by, I think, 4 guys in bizarre sunglasses sitting on deck chairs watching it. It's never mentioned again, and it's extremely surreal. I mean, everyone was probably on drugs at the time, but it's just the craziest thing, and all these things keep popping up. It's the whole thing is very trippy.
Yeah. It captures people, and like you see the balloon like covering their face and stuff. And to me, it can be creepy. Sometimes it looks like I don't know what it's going to kill people or what it's doing. But
The unstoppable and unknowable nature of it, in that you're never really sure, is it mechanical, is it biological, is it both? How is it killing people? And the fact that no one can seem to stop it, to the point where you see quite a few scenes all the way through the show where Rover is bouncing around the village and the people just freeze and stand completely stock still so that it will go past them and not touch them. It's kind of menacing and completely unknowable, and I think that's why it's become this iconic element of the show. that really all you need to do to represent the show is have a guy in a blazer running away from a white sphere, and that's people know what that is. That's the show.
I love it. Why do you think after 50 years that it's still very popular? It's still kind of like cult TV.
Well, I think fundamentally it was just way ahead of its time. You know, as a TV show, I think it really played with the structure of how you did television at the time. So it was part of this stable of ITC shows, which were all produced by a guy called Lou Grade. They were all British shows that were designed to have a sort of an international audience as well. They were often kind of action-orientated, lots of spy things. So you had things like Persuaders, the Avengers, the Champions, all these different things. The Prisoner was unique because it was something that Patrick McGoohan made after he'd been doing a show called Danger Man for a long time. I think he realized that was almost too stilted a show for him to still be doing after whatever 50 odd episodes, and he wanted to do something unique, and this was a show where it allowed him to explore themes that he was interested in a format where it was a limited series. So a lot of these shows were designed to run for a very long time. He said, no, I'm going to have a limited number of episodes. Each episode is going to be about themes such as free will and surveillance and the idea of, you know, personal prisons and Big Brother, all these things which sort of I think resonate as much, if not more now than they did back then. And also, you know, just in terms of how he was doing this show, I mean, all 17 episodes, wonderful little sort of mini movies to watch on their own, all very unique. And yet everything that's in that show, I think, from its iconography to how it's influenced TV, it's seen in sort of the fabric of how TV has been made for the last 50 years. I think certainly it's inspired loads of other cult TV shows that have happened. I'm sure it's certainly something that was watched by a lot of creators of a lot of really great shows at the moment. Just people who kind of thought, you know, let's try and be original with the show. And I think the originality of the premise and the desire to make it has translated to viewers who are like, I want to see something new. And because it's a very timeless show, although it's a very 60s thing as well, you can watch it today and it just seems as fresh as it ever was. It's not really that dated, even though it is set in the 60s.
Yeah.
You know, everything kind of makes it very alien. It just seems like this guy has dropped into this world and it's almost without any context. He is there, he doesn't know, and we don't really know. And I suppose by the end of the series, it's still, you know, although there are some things in the last episodes which really do place it in a kind of trippy, psychedelic 60s sort of Beatles-esque era, you know, most of it just remains completely timeless. And I think you can come to it at any age, and you can come to it at any time in the last 50 years, and it still remains a really fascinating show to watch, but also an entertaining one as well.
I think it's also helped by the fact that for a British show made at that time, it cost a heck of a lot, and the production values were really, really high. British TV at that point was still largely in black and white, but it was all shot in colour on film because they wanted to sell it internationally. They knew they wanted to sell it to the States. So obviously now we have these glorious kind of restored Blu-ray colour versions of it that look spectacular. It probably looks better now than it ever did in the past. A lot of the directors that they had making episodes were more used to being film directors. So it has an incredible filmic quality to it sometimes. There's something about it that makes it stand out even amongst all of those other shows that were being made at that time. I mean, it's one of those shows where you look back and you think, how on earth did they ever actually get away with making this? Because it cost way too much and it must have seemed completely bonkers at the time. You know, you talk to some of the surviving cast members now and they say that, you know, a lot of people didn't really understand what it was about when they came on and did their guest episode. They just kind of ran with it. But Patrick McGoohan knew what it was about, and it was so much with him being the driving force of it and bringing his vision to the show that I think made it what it is, and it's still so fantastic to watch.
Yeah. David Lynch, when he was doing the new Twin Peaks, he wanted to do 18 parts, and Patrick McGoohan wanted to do 7 episodes. He felt like, okay, the story is about, we have enough to tell 7 stories, and the studios, or they were kind of like, okay, we really need to do more than that if we're going to sell this, and I think that's where they ended up with 17. But it's kind of funny that like the two artists, how one wanted more to tell the story and one wanted less. And Becks, Becks, you talked about the Blu-ray, and I felt like you're rubbing it in because the UK got a new 50th anniversary Blu-ray. They included, in my mind, Chris Rodley's documentary, and I was like, I wanted it. I actually been waiting to rewatch The Prisoner for like 2 years because, like, okay, I'll wait for the 50th anniversary. They have to put out a new Blu-ray for this because it's the 50th anniversary. and it never showed up. So I'm jealous of you guys that you got a new Blu-ray.
If enough people want it in the US,
Yes.
hopefully something will come out, especially with the 50th anniversary and hopefully some renewed interest in it.
And Eeson, you mentioned about creators, being influenced by The Prisoner. Mark Frost, co-creator of Twin Peaks, he loved The Prisoner when he was younger. And I'm sure he was influenced by The Prisoner in some way when it came to Twin Peaks.
I remember, I think it was around the time of the UK anniversary when there were lots of tweets going around talking about the fact it was, the 50th anniversary of The Prisoner. And I'm sure Mark Frost himself actually tweeted something where he referred to The Prisoner as the greatest show of all time.
Yeah.
Now, I can just imagine, Mark Frost, probably people like Damon Lindelof. I can imagine the people who made things like The Wire, The Sopranos, or like Vince Gilligan who did Breaking Bad. I think all these people have all mentioned it at some point as a show that was influential. And you can just see that it's the people who have kind of come in this, I don't know what it's called, this kind of golden era of television where people are making these limited event series or sort of shorter runs of really good quality television that's just designed to really be challenging to watch and engage the viewer, that moves away from the network format that was running sort of throughout the 80s and 90s. All those people, I think, are now having this moment where they're able to produce really good original shows. And I think, a huge debt has to be paid to people like McGowan who allowed these things to get made, at least on the UK side. I think lots of people were doing it in other parts of the world as well, including the US. But there are a few creators, I think, who are really doing original things. Like, and you can just imagine, a young Mark Frost watching this, and thinking, oh, wow, this is a really cool show. And then, this probably gets your creative juices flowing in the same way that 25 years ago, people were probably watching Twin Peaks and thinking, what is this thing? And it kind of gets you really creative. It gets you excited about things again. And it's something you engage with.
Oh, yeah. I definitely agree. I listen to all your podcasts, and I think you guys really complement each other so well. And just having you on today is like you guys really know your stuff. Like, you really... you guys are always on top of it. Time for Cherry Pie and Coffee is your Twin Peaks podcast. And you're continuing to do that, right? You're kind of going back and forth between the different podcasts?
Yeah, so this weekend we were at the Freud Lynch conference in London, and it was actually on the train on the way back. We're inspired by all the conversations that were happening. We've kind of decided on how we wanted to sort of bring our Twin Peaks stream back. So we've been kind of doing it on and off since our 5-hour episode about the final episode, 17 and 18 in September. We never really recovered from that ourselves. I don't think anyone even listened to it. But we kind of thought, how is it we can do something that is something that we want to put out, that we think, listeners would want to hear about? And this will be starting probably in the next few weeks, actually.
Yeah.
But we thought it'd be really fun. Again, it's probably a silly idea, I don't know. But we thought with all the titles of the episodes in The Return, as I recall, these titles were not necessarily assigned by Lynch and Frost. They were ones that Showtime came up with, I think, just to give them a name. I think otherwise just referred to as parts. But the titles themselves, we thought, were really interesting jumping off points to discuss sort of tangential aspects of The Return and Twin Peaks itself. So we kind of thought, well, the first one, I think, is called My Log Has a Message for You.
Yeah.
And it was really odd, but we thought it'd be really fun to talk about, things to do with Twin Peaks that are related to the telegraph poles and the trees and things like that, and just see how that kind of ties into things. We wanted to do one, I think the Case Files one we've got scheduled is going to be about actually Mark Frost's contribution to everything, because we like the idea that they're kind of these ancillary documents that come along with the TV show,
like a dossier.
We want to do, so all these titles are kind of jumping off points for us to talk about sort of new topics that we think will just be not kind of recap and review kind of things, but like almost sort of short mini essays that we can just kind of talk about and see if anyone else is interested in them too.
I like that. I think that's great.
That is a great idea.
Cool.
We finally cracked what each of the 18 episodes is going to be about. Some of the tangents are way off. But I think they'll probably start in about 2 weeks or so.
Great.
Yeah, we're working on the material for the first one at the moment.
Nice.
And we've got them all plotted out, yeah.
So it was just last weekend, the Freud Lynch conference. How was that?
It was really good. It was 2 days of sort of talks about everything to do with David Lynch's whole career. So it leans more towards his films than Twin Peaks, but there was quite a lot of Twin Peaks Return in there. And it all ended with a big panel discussion just about the return. And there were some really great talks in there. So Chris Rodley gave a talk. There was one, Catherine Spooner gave a talk about costume and Lynch's use of costumes it throughout his films and in Twin Peaks. There was one about they're referred to as the was it the Split Identity trilogy, the Blurred Identity trilogy of Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, and Inland Empire together, and examining how they all look at kind of fractures in identity. There was one about the art influences on Lynch, and that there was some great kind of pictures put up showing some of the shots from The Return next to some paintings by some artists that Lynch has talked about as being influential on him, where you can see him almost recreating certain paintings and images within The Return, which was absolutely incredible to see.
Cool.
Oh, yeah. We've noticed it too, yeah. On Twitter, people are posting about the artwork and stuff that he kind of mimicked in season 3. He brought to life, especially the picture of the dog with the antlers. It looks like he's on fire. And then come to find out there was actually a real picture he drew a couple years back.
Oh.
Yeah, it's kind of really interesting that I think through The Return there are these two really striking aspects of some of the visuals, at least, which is, firstly, there's the use of many bits of imagery that he's used in all the different artworks he's done in all different media throughout his career. That keeps popping up. And also, clearly, he's decided to pay a little bit of an homage to some of the other artists who have influenced him as well. So you get a lot of Hopper imagery throughout the whole thing. It's really interesting just as a piece to watch. It's strange because you can experience The Return as something that you can watch, you can listen to it, you can just experience it. There are all these different ways of feeling the show, I think. But certainly just by watching it, it's a beautiful thing to watch.
It is.
Truly.
I mean, everything is so wonderfully composed. I think it really does come from somebody who is not solely a filmmaker, but actually sort of a visual artist. They know how to put something together and compose, the image with the sound so beautifully that it evokes feelings in you that it's just stuff you just don't get from other TV. And I think it's in that respect, it also supersedes, I think, elements of seasons 1 and 2 and Fire Walk With Me in how all-encompassing an emotional experience it is.
Going back to The Prisoner, you're on like episode 8 now, so you're almost halfway through The Prisoner.
Yeah.
It was kind of a shock when we actually realised that we were halfway through, because it feels like we've been doing it for a long time now.
Well, I think we put out about 20 hours or something, so it does feel like a long time.
Yeah, we just recorded part of our next episode, which is going to be episode 9, so we are pretty much halfway there, and we have already got some of the interviews that are going to be coming up later. We have already recorded because we needed to get people when they were available, but it's actually been really fun for us to sit down and watch all the episodes of The Prisoner through again, sometimes sort of 2 or 3 times, and think about them in these terms and just try to vocalize what it is that we're feeling about them. It's a very different experience to just watching the show when you suddenly think, hang on, I've got to talk about this. I've got to somehow put into words what it is that I'm feeling. But it's really good fun.
So I'm still debating, should we ruin this for Brian? Is Brian ever going to watch? Are you ever going to watch it?
You could ruin it for me if you like, if you really want to tell me the ending.
I don't know. I mean, because then we could have a couple minutes discussion on it. But at the same time, if you think you'll go out and see it at some point, I'll let you.
I am interested. I could leave the room, and the 3 of you can talk about the ending.
All right, why don't we do that?
I can grab a cup of coffee.
Get a cup of coffee.
Yeah, because you guys have piqued my interest.
All right.
Before I let you guys talk about the ending, the way you describe it, in my head, the only thing I can think of, it's like mushing Lost and Doctor Who together. And the part of Lost I'm thinking of is Dharma. Is when that one season starts and you're with Ben and you're with the group and they're having a book club. And all of a sudden the plane explodes above their book club. And and you see a different perspective. That's the part what you're saying, that he just appears in this new place.
Right.
And I kind of think of the Dharma Initiative.
Yeah. And we didn't say, did we, though, the village is an island, isn't it?
Well, is it? Is this part of where we're going to be talking about the last
All right, maybe we should. That's a great point. Never mind.
Don't ruin that for me.
I would say that when I first watched it, I thought that the village was an island. Especially, I mean, you can see in the first episode that, he's trying to escape, and I would be led to believe that he's on an island and that there is nowhere to go.
So my lost connection is pretty close.
Yeah.
And then when you mentioned the white block, the white sphere, I think of something out of Doctor Who, with a weird alien and a practical effect and
a
something
little
like
bit.
that.
I mean, it probably doesn't go as crazy as Doctor Who, but I mean, it's got elements maybe.
The sphere planet of aliens. All right, I'll let you guys talk about the end. I'll get a cup of coffee.
Okay.
Just open the door crack when you're ready.
All right, he's gone. Let's talk about Brian. No kidding. So the big thing in the Prisoner is who is number one, and I mean, we're led to believe by the end it seems like number 6 is number one. Is that how you take it to be?
There's something very strange about that last episode. I mean, it was very hastily put together, and I think it throws up many different possibilities. It could be interpreted in many different ways. What we do see is the reveal that a character who is thought to be number one is found by number 6. He's found wearing a mask, which when removed reveals the mask of like a gorilla. And when that mask comes off, it is Patrick McGowan underneath. And they have this weird, strange, very, very Dale Cooper, Doppel Cooper kind of face-off in the whole thing. And it is revealed that number one is number 6. Now, whether that's like a literal representation of what's happening, or whether it relates to McGowan's idea that everyone is kind of in one's own prison in some way. Right. That there are many ways of interpreting it. I think the most literal one is that number one is indeed number 6. But there are elements of it that make you wonder whether, even that is an allegory for what McGowan was trying to say about the nature of identity. The fact that the village itself is filled with strange experiments that seem to generate doubles of people and ways to obscure identity. It's unclear exactly what's going on. I mean, indeed, there are elements that suggest that 6 is aware of what the village might actually be, or certainly the people he works for or worked for formerly back in London were aware of what the village was. Wow. I think it can be read that way. Well, I think everyone's going to have very subtly different interpretations of what those final few minutes mean. But I think certainly, it does appear that number one's identity, which 6 has been looking for the whole time, is actually himself.
Yeah, he does escape at the end, but I'm trying to remember now. Did he go? Was he in a car? He was in a truck or something. But I don't think he even had to go by boat or plane. He just seemed to ride off.
That's what's so bizarre about that last episode is that previously you've seen escape attempts happen by sea. And it has seemed that the village is on an island of some kind. And yet, in that final episode, they seem to drive through a tunnel and emerge, and they're just not that far from London. Yeah. And then they just drive to London. You think, well, how does any of this work, the geography of where we thought the village was? And, they've got that truck with the kind of open side with the bars, which was introduced in the penultimate episode, and they just drive through London, and you just have bizarre music, and then just no explanation at the end. It just ends, and it's as endings go. I think it's up there with part 18 of The Return. Yeah. In some ways, just saying to the viewer, like, right, well, that's up to you then. What do you think happened? Because we're not really going to explain it to you. It was pretty audacious to do it back then, and I think it's still a risky thing to do now in terms of people wanting some kind of narrative conclusion and then not getting it.
Oh, this is like the curtain call. Like the show is over and they're kind of like taking their final bow, and it's like they're that's the way they're going to end it. But then he gets to his house and the door opens by itself, and it makes you think. It makes you think of the door in the village. And it's like, wait a minute, is he still a prisoner? Is he still in the village?
Yeah. So earlier on, I think it's in Many Happy Returns, he manages to make it out of the village by means which are unclear, because it's certainly not the same route he takes in Fallout. But what happens there is that he returns to his old house, number 1 Buckingham Place, and the door does open normally. It's opened by a maid, and there's a new occupant in the house who is revealed to be an important character in the prisoner mythology. And yet, yeah, you're right. In the last episode, he goes back home and it just automatically opens. It does make you wonder, you know, exactly what it's all kind of meant to mean. I think even those last few minutes, you know, is this actually all something which is not necessarily imagined, but like a potential way that this whole thing plays out? Because it all ends in this strange fever dream as, you know, at the end of Once Upon a Time, there's such strange things going on. There's the rocket, there's all the people in the strange masks who are all singing Dem Bones over and over again. There's the guy who's the judge, who was formerly a character in The Girl Who Was Death, was it?
Yeah.
You've got the kid who was in... Living in Harmony, returning here. And it's strange because obviously there was talk about how McGowan wanted to continue the series in some capacity, and his original idea was to have a spin-off show that would take place with the kid and the butler having adventures. I don't know what form that would have been, but that would have been an incredible show. It would have had nothing to do with number 6. That was the proposed follow-up that never actually happened.
Isn't that something? Wow. That's crazy. I didn't realize they ever talked about a spin-off. I hadn't heard that before.
I think an aspect of it must have been... So with the final episode being so controversial, so famously the switchboards in the UK were jammed at the networks that were showing the episode because everyone just went crazy and wanted to know what was going on. McGowan had to take his family and leave the country. There was all these... I think there were death threats being made. He was being hounded all the time. You know, people wanting to know what the hell was going on. I think they weren't satisfied by it, but it's strange because I think if that ending had played out now, people would be able to accept it in light of television that's taking place.
Yeah. It's amazing a TV show would have had that. I mean, people get upset, but to get that upset that you feel like you have to leave the country, I mean.
I know, and it's incredibly sad, but he almost felt like it was sort of an albatross around his neck in some ways. And, you know, he'd been doing films in America and, you know, the decision, like, right, well, I'm just going to go and do more films in America and do TV in America and get away from the people who keep stopping me on the street and ask me what on earth that last episode of television was all about, because it was such a big thing in Britain at the time. You know, it was a hugely successful show, pretty much the most famous actor on British TV when they made The Prisoner, because Danger Man had been a hugely successful show. Millions of people were watching it, and then the Prisoner had become almost one of the first water cooler TV shows before that was even a thing. You know, people talked about it in the playground and at work. It was a thing that everyone discussed, and so to be given such a bizarre conclusion, I think the world wasn't ready for it. You know, at the end of Back to the Future, when he says, "You're not ready for this, but your kids are going to love it." It was almost like that.
It's so true. Chris Rodley's documentary, In My Mind, he interviews Patrick McGowan, and there is a point where Patrick says that, The Prisoner was... a lot of it was in his mind and stuff, which I thought, like, wow, like he's really saying, in some ways he could be saying kind of like Twin Peaks, is it all a dream, or is it like, is a lot of this things that he's going through is mental and not really happening?
What's really interesting about it, and I think it's a strong parallel to how Lynch sometimes talks about Twin Peaks, is that I think there's an element of it which is very much a part of the creator. And The Prisoner, it just could not have been made by anyone else except for McGowan, in the same way that it took Lynch and Frost to make Twin Peaks. There are so many elements of The Prisoner which are very personal to him, and I think he just didn't want to talk about it afterwards. He felt that everything that needed to be known about The Prisoner was in those episodes. That's the only thing he ever really said about it, and different people are going to get different things out of it, and to talk about it or explain it would actually undermine it, because it would then apply a label or a meaning to it. Whereas I think he liked the fact that he clearly had an idea of what it was about. Everyone gets something different from it, and I think he liked the fact that it was open to interpretation. He didn't want something where it was wrapped up with a neat little bow at the end of 17 episodes. It was important to him. He felt it was important to make. I think it drained him completely. I mean, certainly when we've spoken to people who were involved in the show on the podcast, they've spoken about how he was a ferocious character on the set. I think he wanted full control of this thing. And I think it was, I mean, more than being his baby, it was just like, this was something in him that he wanted to get out, I think. And when it was out, he wanted to be done with it. I think it was almost quite cathartic of him to put this show out. And I think he must have been secretly quite happy that it had the longevity that it did. But I think he didn't want all the trouble that came with fans who were terrorizing him, trying to work out, what did this mean? What did that mean?
What are you guys talking about, Twin Peaks or The Prisoner?
It could have been either.
It could have been.
It really sounded like you're talking about Lynch.
No, we're talking about The Prisoner.
I know, but that's exactly what I think about. Like, everything you said, I was like, oh, David Lynch. Yeah,
I know.
definitely.
And so I discovered The Prisoner in college, so this is the mid 90s or getting to later 90s. I'd heard if you like Twin Peaks, you'd like The Prisoner. And so that's how I discovered it. It's like, oh, I got to find that. I got to get my VHS tapes of The Prisoner here. Oh, I wanted to mention, too, is that, in the United States, before The Prisoner, there was another show, Danger Man, but in the U.S. it was called Secret Agent Man. And
Secret Agent Man, yeah.
Secret Agent Man.
Yeah, I love that theme song.
There's a man who leads a life of danger. Everyone he meets, he stays a stranger. Read every move he makes, another chance he takes. Odds are he won't live to see tomorrow. Secret agent man, they're giving you a number and taking away your name.
There's an interesting connection here because you never know what number 6's name is in The Prisoner. And although it's sometimes alluded to that he might have been a spy, you never really know what his job was, only that it's something connected to the British government that meant that he knew secrets, basically. And some people have read it as he is still his character from Danger Man, this spy named John Drake.
Yeah. But
John Drake has now been transplanted into the village, but they never use that name, but they almost occasionally make little knowing jokes about it. There's I think at one point there's a photograph of number 6 that's used, and it's the publicity still of him as John Drake from Danger Man.
That's something.
It's almost like they're just teasing the audience with this, but it's not actually him in the sense that they ever confirm this, but it's just one way of reading it.
Yeah, and Mark Steen, who was the co-creator, but who departed after the first sort of 12 or 13 episodes. So he was a co-creator with McGowan, and I think Mark Steen was more keen on the idea of number 6 being John Drake, whereas McGowan just liked the ambiguity of it. So it can be read either way. Personally, I like to think of number 6 as somebody different, just because I think it adds even more to the mystique about the whole thing. There is a wonderful sort of link to Danger Man or Secret Agent Man, or I don't know. I think if they re-release the Blu-ray of Danger Man but put you singing the theme tune on it, it could be huge.
I love that theme song. I mean, I never saw the show, but when I was younger, I heard that song on the Classic Rock channel.
Yes.
I recorded it, and I drove my parents up the wall with that song. I absolutely loved it. And I didn't know it was a show. I think my parents told me it was a show. And I was just kind of like, I just love the song. That's an awesome song.
I also learned, only recently, it was probably Chris's documentary that Patrick McGowan could have been James Bond. He turned it down.
So,
wow.
That would have been a remarkable turn of events, but it would have probably changed the direction of James Bond forever. So he was going to do it, was it after Sean Connery?
I think it may have even been that they asked him before Sean Connery.
Wow.
And he didn't want to do it. If you watch The Prisoner, you'll notice that unlike a lot of those kind of glossy spy shows of the time, number 6, he never gets into romantic entanglements with anybody. He never carries a gun. And these were all things that came from McGowan's influence that speak to his character, really. The reason that it's believed that he turned down being James Bond is because he didn't like those elements of James Bond as a character. And if you take those elements away from James Bond, you're almost not actually left with a character, because if he's not womanizing and shooting bad guys, then what is he doing? Right. He isn't really doing anything at all,
That's fun.
But it's the shows that McGowan had the biggest influence over, that they almost only become clear when you look at them in contrast to other shows that were around at the time. And it has quite an interesting effect on The Prisoner, because you don't have any female characters that are just there to be a love interest. You actually get some really interesting female characters that are just there in other capacities. Whereas you watch a lot of those other shows that were around at that time, there are a lot of, girlfriends and love interests around. But in The Prisoner, they had to be a bit more creative and find ultimately more interesting and satisfying things for female characters to be.
Yeah. This has been a great talk about The Prisoner for the 50th anniversary. So are you still doing Time for Cakes and Ale, or is your attention right now on the Tally Ho podcast?
So, we are still doing Time for Cakes now. We've just had so much of our time taken up on the Tally Ho these last couple of months, because we've been getting so many episodes out and also recording bits for episodes that haven't come out yet. But we are still doing it. There's going to be an episode coming out. Well, I can't promise when it's going to be because we haven't recorded it yet. But I think we're going to do an episode soon about The Good Place.
Oh, awesome.
Because it's one of our favourite shows at the moment.
I love it. Good.
I've watched it way too many times. I can practically recite lines with it now when I watch it.
You need to convince Brian to check it out. I've been trying to get him to watch this show.
Well, I will. I have so many shows.
Listen to their podcast.
All right, I will.
It's so good. It's one of the best comedies out there right now.
I know. I have a long list.
It's another example of a show that it doesn't need to have a 22 season sitcom style where everything goes back to the beginning. It's a show that takes the fact that it can just do these 12 episode seasons and embraces it.
Is there anything else you want to share with us about any of your podcasts before you go?
Well, just that all three of them are going to continue. I mean, we're going to have our next Tally Ho coming out next Wednesday, which is going to be about the episode Checkmate. It's a really great episode. And we've got our guest on for that one is a guy named Rick Davey, who runs the Unmutual website, which is a huge prisoner fan site. He's incredibly knowledgeable about the series. That was really fun recording that chat with him that we did very recently. And as we said, we're going to be bringing some more Cherry Pie and Coffee back with these kind of shorter themed episodes, which we're going to start recording soon. And we are doing Cakes and Ale, we promise. It's just been fitting it into the schedule has been crazy. But yeah, we're planning to do The Good Place. And I think at some point we're going to do an Infinity War one as well.
Oh, nice.
It's just going to be a bit calmer once we've got just these next few Tally Ho episodes under our belt, I think.
Yeah, one thing about the Tally Ho as well is, so what we do is we tend to kind of ramble about the episodes for about an hour and a half, talking about what we think about them, what we like and all these things. And but what we always have is a special guest. So we've got some really interesting ones who we've got lined up for the sort of back half of the season. So we've got some people who are involved in writing some really interesting books about the show, some filmmakers who are involved in it, and also some of the original cast are popping up for interviews as well. So it's getting hard to track people down. Obviously, it's a very old show, but it's remarkable how we've managed to, I think, also get some interviews with people that have really interesting perspectives on it as well. So if you're interested in the show, and I think it's a good time to come to it just because it is the 50th anniversary, and if you can get your hands on a copy, it really is worth watching. If you're a fan of Twin Peaks, I think The Prisoner is a really interesting show that I think you might just take to as well. It would be really interesting just in terms of watching along for the first time and sort of having like a review and recap kind of style analysis, but also the really fun bit, I think, are the interviews that we have with people that go along with it, because I think it's a show whose legacy is kept alive by the people who are actually peripheral to it, because obviously Patrick McGowan is no longer with us, but it's remarkable how many interesting stories still survive based on people who knew him, people who are in the show, and all those different things as well. So if anyone is thinking about taking a dive into The Prisoner, now's a good time, and the Tally Ho is the place to find out about it.
Totally.
Nice.
I should add that we've been keeping our recaps spoiler free for subsequent episodes. So if somebody's watching it for the first time, you can watch episode 4 and then listen to our podcast about episode 4, and we're not going to be talking about loads of stuff that happens later in the series. So
awesome.
If you are watching for the first time, you can effectively sort of take the Tally Ho along with you while you're doing it.
Awesome.
That's so cool.
I think I'll do that.
You guys had Chris Rodley on, and you guys did 2 shows on that, and I love both of the interview and the talk with him, and that was such good shows. And was each show an hour and a half long? But it was really immediate.
Yeah.
There was a lot going on.
Yeah, it was really fun because we got in touch with him, and I think we kind of spent sort of a good few hours chatting, and it's one of those things where if ever you're in a room with a fan of a similar thing. In this case, it was both Twin Peaks and The Prisoner through obviously Chris's work with Lynch on Lynch, his knowledge of Lynch's filmography and sort of general sort of art history as well. And he knew McGowan as well. I mean, to be in a room with somebody who, really has some really interesting insights into it and is obviously, a really great documentary filmmaker himself. To be honest, I think we could have spoken to him for days, but we cut it down to 3 hours and they were really fun. Those were really fun episodes.
So good. I definitely recommend you check those out.
Awesome.
Well, thank you. Can you tell people how can they follow you? Where can they learn more about your podcasts?
You can get the Time for Cakes Now podcast. The stream for Time for Cakes Now contains all of our podcasts. So if you subscribe to Time for Cakes Now on iTunes or through whatever podcast app you use, you'll get all of those and all the Tally Ho and all the Cherry Pie and Coffee all in one stream.
That's how I do it.
Awesome.
And you can also find them all on our website, which is timeforcakesnow.com. There's download links and web players on there. And if you want to get in touch with us, you can get in touch on the website or on Twitter. We are TFCAA, because Time for Cakes Now was too big to put in as a handle. And we're on Facebook as well. There's a Time for Cakes Now page on Facebook. But most of the time we're on Twitter, so do drop us a line if you want to chat about The Prisoner or Twin Peaks or anything else, really.
Cool.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks for having us on.
Here I am in America for the very first time in 1983 on a mission to get an interview with Patrick McGowan about his groundbreaking television series, The Prisoner. A dream because the series had changed my life back in 1968 when it was first shown in Britain. A dream because you almost never get to meet your heroes. A dream because an infant Channel 4 television in London had commissioned a documentary about its making. A dream because I knew nothing about making television programs. With the help of a director, this would be my first.
So we're here with Chris Rodley, known for his book Lynch on Lynch, and he produced and directed over 30 documentaries, one of which is In My Mind, the Prisoner documentary that came out for the 50th anniversary. Hi, Chris.
Hi, how you doing?
Great. This In My Mind documentary is such a gift to the prisoner community. It is really something special. I'm so impressed with it. I rented it, and then right after I rented it, I said, boy, this is so good. I have to own it. So then I bought it right after renting it. It's such a great documentary. So, Brian has never seen The Prisoner. Could you explain, for someone who hadn't seen it before, what is it all about? What is this TV show?
Well, I've been thinking about this. I can describe it and I can explain it, but unfortunately describing it doesn't explain it, and explaining it doesn't describe it. It's an odd thing. It starts off, there's a guy, we assume he's a spy, because the actor Patrick McGowan had become very famous in Britain by playing a guy called John Drake in what we call Danger Man, and I think the Americans called Secret Agent. Yeah. So we assume he's a spy in an opening montage, which means that they don't ever have to really explain anything. In a kind of very, very beautiful economic sequence, he seems to be pissed about something. He, in a resignation letter, storms out, is about to leave the country, when this is all kind of silent, like a silent movie in a way, and he's sort of kidnapped by a couple of undertakers in a hearse, which is already should alert you that something's not quite right. And he wakes up in a kind of strange place, which is like a holiday resort, but actually it's like a prison camp. So it has a kind of veneer of loveliness and an underbelly of pure horribleness. And he doesn't know who's running the place, and all they want to know is why did you resign your job? He won't tell them. And for 17 weeks. They try and find out why he resigned. He continues to resist them. Everyone in this village has a number. He's number 6. He's interrogated constantly by number 2s who kind of rotate. And he wants to know who number 1 is. So actually the kind of thing of the series is a bit like Laura Palmer. Who killed Laura Palmer? That's one of the things that keeps going on. Who is number 1? Right at the end, we find out completely, inexplicably, in one sense, that number 1 is him. He's the bad guy. It's the bad part of himself, we think, because you only get 48 frames of a glimpse of him. He's also the bad guy. He kind of runs away from the village. There's a sign which says London 27 miles. I can assure you there's no coastline 27 miles away from London. He goes home, and it's quite clear from the sound effects and just the feel of it that actually he hasn't escaped anything. He's a kind of prisoner of himself and a prisoner of everything around him, and it suddenly he's tipped into something else. So that's the kind of description. It's something that literally fell apart before your eyes. I mean, it literally disintegrated. And it's a kind of, it's a horrible kind of thing at first, and everyone sort of hated that because it was supposed to be one thing and it became another. To explain it is a bit difficult, but you could really see it very clearly in terms of Patrick McGoohan. It's really all to do with him. Here's a guy, he's the most popular guy on television, the highest paid, more than Roger Moore as the Saint, and he's got a guy who loves him, Lord Grade or Lee Grade, who pays for everything, who says, and he says to Lord Grade, I don't want to do this anymore, I'm bored. And Lord Grade says, well, what do you want to do? And he says, I want to do this. And he's got a crazy idea. It's only really supposed to be 7 episodes. It's a kind of serial, not a series, and it's a kind of a mind piece. And he hasn't got anything in how to finish it, but he's got the kind of basic thing. But he wields so much power, and the money is there, and his Lord Grade loves him so much. It's just go. It's not on the handshake. It's very expensive, actually.
Yeah.
So he goes off. He finds it. He's found this place already, Port Mary, an extraordinary kind of place in North Wales. It was the dream of Coughlin and Jellis, who was a kind of low-rent William Randolph Hearst. I mean, he kind of, built this thing out of bits and pieces that he nicked from around the world. Similar thing, except he was a bit of a toff, a bit of a posh guy instead of a low-life kind of yellow press guy like Hearst. But anyway, so he's found the location. But he's got a problem. He knows that he wants to do something very, very significant and serious because he believes in television. And actually not many people believe in television, I don't think, in those days. Television was his palette, it was his vision, and it was his kind of destiny. So he thinks television is a very powerful thing. I want to say something that's worth saying. I've got a message. I've got a big message. And so he starts off, and it's a kind of, he takes an entire team of people with him from Danger Man. He needs them. He's got a brilliant team. He's the best production designers. He's got probably the best ever in the entire world, first AD in David Tomlin. There's never been any better. He's made most of the American movies that you've seen, and a lot of ours as well. An extraordinary guy. He's got just a brilliant team. He moves them into this idea. He gets writers, but the problem is, there's a basic problem there in that his singular vision, and it was absolutely singular. When you come to it, you've got to use other people to help you, and I think it started off with one thing and became another because he needed those people. He needed those writers, and he needed everyone to help him do it. But in the end, he had a very clear idea, and other people had a different idea by then. And so it sort of fractured. And there was a rush to the ending. I think you should probably know he wanted to do 7 episodes. Lord Grade couldn't sell 7 episodes anywhere, so he could sell 13, I think, to the Americans and to us. And then when that didn't quite work out, I think the Americans agreed, CBS, whoever it was, agreed to do another 4, make it 17 and call it a day. And so there was a rush to kind of finish it all off. So it's weird because it sort of started off as something very unique, had to do it under a kind of spy, espionage, British serial kind of guise. And when it came, what actually happened, I believe, is it became what it always was meant to be, a kind of allegory. It was never, what else was he going to do? He was famous for being John Drake's secret agent, So that was the guise, the cloak under which he could get into that thing. But really, because Pat is such a crazy guy, and because he's a very, very strict Roman Catholic and had a very strict Roman Catholic upbringing and education, and had a kind of evangelical, he wanted to change the world, actually, I think. He wanted to say something. So it got all snarled up in what telly normally has to do. So that's what was so great about it. You could tell while you were seeing it. It was not like anything else because it was kind of tortured Frankenstein experiment. I wrote to him when it finished. I was 13, I can't remember. I wrote to him because I was so appalled. I'd given 17 hours of my life to this thing every Sunday, not doing my homework for school on Monday, I wrote him saying, what was that? And I actually got a letter back. I think a lot of people got a letter back. It was a kind of agreed letter because he'd already bunked, he'd already fled the country because people were upset. 17 million people watched that final one. I got a letter with it was a printed signature and a booklet, which was called The Plain Man's Guide to the Prisoner. So I kind of felt that was all right. When I read a lot of it, I thought, I think I got that anyway. It was like people, like you've done with Twin Peaks. You have a suspicion, and then you think, I was right anyway. Why did I not believe my own intuition? It would have been the beginning of water cooler moments or something, whatever they horribly call those things.
Yeah. So 50 years ago, actually got to see it. 50 years ago, you were watching this. What was it about the show that you enjoyed so much as a kid? Were you 13, 15, something like that? Like, what was it about the show then that you loved so much?
I think it was everything, really. I mean, weirdly, it was shot in color, but we saw it in black and white. When you see it in color now, it's gobsmacking to think we had to watch it in black and white because although it was shot in color because they were being smart about the future, it went out in black and white, rather poor quality actually. But everything about it was visually fantastic. It was incredibly unusual. It was also a mix of genres. It was like spy, but it felt like there was some science fiction in there and some psychological drama. And also, really importantly, actually, it was hip. And I was only 15 at the time, but you could feel that it was hip. At that time of my life, and lots of people's lives like my age, I was only interested in two things, television and music. And Sgt. Pepper had come out 4 months before, so the world was kind of different. Freak Out by the Mother's Invention had come out pretty much the same time. That was, there was a track on that called Who Are the Brain Police. That was pretty, the new Pink Floyd album, first Doors album, the Velvets. So in music, pretty much every time you switched on the radio or bought a record, there was a different sound. Yeah. Whether it was a backwards guitar solo by Jimi Hendrix or Ray Manzarek switching his organ off and then back on again in Hello, I Love You, whatever, different sounds. And so it seemed that it was hip. And actually, secret agents weren't hip. They were terrible, boring. They weren't hip because, of course, they worked for the FBI or the CIA or MI6. They were boring. James Bond, however hip, he was really not hip. He was a guy who wore tweeds and jodhpurs and ties and shirts and who in Goldfinger in 1964 said, to the girl who got painted in gold just before she got painted in gold and died, oh, my dear girl, do you not know that drinking Dom Perignon 1953 above 4 degrees centigrade is just not done. It's just like listening to the Beatles without earmuffs. It's like, what? I mean, these are not hip guys. They're not hip guys. The hip guys, actually, you had a few because you had Ilya Kuryakin and Napoleon Solo, who, the men from U.N.C.L.E. But then, who was U.N.C.L.E.? That wasn't exactly the FBI, so they were like freelancers. So, it felt to me like what the prisoner did was, he was a guy who, he had been the government guy, but he'd had enough. And actually, we'd all had enough. I mean, we'd had enough too. We felt like people were telling us about how long to grow out, not to grow out hair, not to wear this or do that or read this or do that. And the clever thing about the series was that he was, because he didn't trust anyone, he didn't know who was running the village, he was against everybody. He was against all authority, which is exactly what we were. We were like, so this is a good guy. He's hip. He knows. He can't trust anyone because we can't. Who shot JFK? We don't know. Yeah. What's going on. So it seemed to me quite clever. So I think it was everything. Also, I won't go on too much for finding. That is, even though I'm married to Twin Peaks, there's never been a first episode of anything as good as Arrival. It's the most unbelievably, brilliantly set up first episode of anything. It's got everything. It's all the fantastic location work, the brilliant kind of sets, which was done at MGM while Kubrick was doing 2001. It's got a big vision, and it's such a perfect piece of writing and filming, actually. So it was just captivating from the get-go. There's no way, you were on board immediately.
So years later, you wrote about The Prisoner for such magazines as Prime Time in 1982, and in Degree Absolute, the production, destruction, and afterlife of The Prisoner, you tell the history of The Prisoner with great details, and even included an episode guide. Do you think it's articles like this that got you The Prisoner documentary at Channel 4?
No, I got the job. First of all, I should say there's a lot of really bad errors in those early writings. I didn't, I was of the belief that you could watch something and you could kind of work it out just by watching it. I didn't really know a lot. So I think there were some serious errors, and I came to some seriously wrong conclusions based on bad info. But no, I got the job because 1983, and Channel 4 had just started the year before, and I saw that they had bought the series and they were going to run it, and I just thought, Christ, if they're going to run it, I'd really love to make a documentary about it, but I don't know how to do that. And I was in Paris at the time. I was running an independent cinema in London, and I had to go to Paris to meet Peter Brook to try and buy a movie off him because we had distribution as well. I didn't get it. And I wrote a thing in a bar called La Palette, I remember it so clearly, in Rue Saint-Germain. I wrote what I guess is a treatment for a documentary, and I sent it to Channel 4. And because Channel 4 didn't know what they were doing in those days, brilliant, I got a call within a couple of days saying, come in, and I went in, and they said, we're going to make it. But you don't know anything about television and how to do it, do you? And I said, no. And they said, well, don't worry, because, it's not rocket science. We'll stitch you with a director and a producer. And within, 10 days, I was in LA. So it was a long shot, but in those days you could do that.
Wow.
You could never, ever, ever, ever do that. Now, there was never a moment in television when you could have done that, actually, except at Channel 4. Because Channel 4 had a weird remit. When they started, they were given a remit which said they had to produce innovative television and get 10% of the audience share. But those don't go together. They've got about 4%, because if you do one, you don't get the other. But they were willing to take on someone who knew absolutely nothing, but had the kind of knowledge. So that was their risk, and I think we all lived to regret it. No, really, truly.
How did you convince Patrick McGoohan to even get involved with the project? Like, here's somebody he's not really known for doing a lot of interviews, and you weren't as well known, and yet you convinced him to be a part of the project.
Yeah, it's really annoying. And I wrote him a begging letter, and in those days you had to write a letter. I don't even think your faxes. This is like 1983, mid-83. I wrote him a begging letter, I think. It was 2 pages long. I remember that very clearly, and I sent it to his home in Pacific Palisades. I don't know how I got the address. Anyway. I wrote him a begging letter, and you had to wait for someone to write back, or to call you. And he called and said that he would do it. I don't know why. It must have been a hell of a letter. I wish I had a copy of it. I really wish I'd kept it. So stupid. But, you had to put a carbon copy. It's literally, anyway, it's primitive.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I think, I can only guess now, I think what he may have gone for is I promised him for the bottom of my heart that I would not take any of the mystery out of it, any of the magic out of it, or say this equals that, this means that we would maintain the mystery absolutely as much as we could. It was going to be a teasing thing. That's maybe why he went for it. I don't know. I think maybe he regretted it later because it was such a torment actually making the thing. And I felt sorry for him, and I think he felt sorry for me, actually. I hope, a bit, as it was happening. I think also he wanted to do it because, he had this messianic complex, I mean that in a caring way, he thought everyone in Britain hated him because he'd let them down over this thing. This was this big thing, and everyone watched it, no one understood it, and that they would, he used the phrase, actually, they will crucify me. So he went to America, he never came back, and I think he wanted to sort of confess, that's his Roman Catholic side, and also speak to the British public so they didn't hate him so much. Of course, the British public loved him. He was completely wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, they adored him. They would have forgiven him anything. But he thought they didn't like what he'd done, and I think he saw this documentary as an opportunity to kind of clear the air a bit. As the documentary says, I didn't know that actually, he'd already done an interview for Canadian television, but that's not the same thing. That was an educational channel in Toronto, because a university in Toronto, amazingly, was teaching Had the Prisoner on the syllabus, for Christ's sake. So he'd spoken to the Canadians, but that wasn't the same. So I think he thought, I've got some things to get off my chest.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I never asked him, why did you do it at Dent? I was scared of him anyway. I mean, he's scary. He's a scary guy.
Yeah, and here's a hero of yours. I mean, he was a hero, and you got the chance to interview him. And what was like your first impressions of him? I mean, like, watching the In My Mind documentary, he seems almost as intense as Number 6, and he seems maybe a little mischievous, and sometimes, of course, and he was a little frustrated with the project. But I was just curious, do you remember your impressions of him?
Yeah, I don't know what the language barriers may be here, but I'll say he's fucking frightening. We met him at the top of the Huntley Hotel, the bar at the top of the Huntley Hotel, and it was frightening right from the get-go. It was frightening. He came in, he started reading us the kind of riot act about who we could interview, who we were not allowed to interview, all these conditions, massive conditions. We must not interview under any circumstances George Markstein, who was the script editor and who'd had a serious falling out with, because Markstein, since then, it was all his idea. You know, there was a lot of bad blood there. And unfortunately, we couldn't agree to any of these things because we were just making something for telly. We couldn't agree to conditions. I mean, no television company will allow that. They won't. You know, they like to be independent. So it was really frightening. He was like 1,000% right on it. And very, very, it seemed to me to be angry, permanently angry, to say the least, very troubled, very tortured. I mean, very, very early on, he said to me, "Chris, don't you think that when you get married, you should be a virgin?" And so that was an early question, and I'd already failed that test, obviously. And I knew that it was very, very serious, all this stuff. And he wanted to, he had very high standards, and very, very high standards, morally and artistically. So if you didn't, it would be quite hard to meet those standards. And I think the people who followed him loved him because of that. It's like one of your own guys, Sam Peckinpah. I did a film about Sam Peckinpah once. Sam's a monster. Weirdly, the same people kept going back and back and back. I mean, I've seen grown men. I interviewed a guy called Gordy Dawson, who's Sam Peckinpah's first AD. Anyway, he's worked with Sam a lot. He's a grown man with a bar in his house, one of those guys. And he cried. I mean, he literally cried when he was talking about Sam. It was so horrible. Yeah. So you'd have to say, "What? You did 7 movies with him, Gordy." Okay, I understand you don't like gutting donkeys so you can get some vultures to kind of come over. I understand why, you don't like packing chickens in the sand up to their heads so that you can shoot their heads off. And then because the weight of the sand and the heat of the sand, the chickens fall asleep, so you have to go and squirt lighter fluid in their face in order to get the shot. But why did you go back, man? I mean, so I think Patrick, he expected a lot from you, but I think everyone knew it was worth it, and I knew it would be worth it, but I didn't know what I was doing. Yeah. And I had a director who abdicated within about 3 minutes, because once the going got tough, he just sort of surrendered. A crew who were, it now seems to me, inept. And so I could just see my baby crumbling, and I could just see the thing crumbling before my eyes. So it was at once glorious to meet him and have that. But also, it was really horrible looking as if something was going to fall. It was literally falling apart before your eyes, and will we have anything? Will we be able to make a film out of it? So it's pretty terrifying. You've never done one before.
Yeah, and so you go through this, and you shoot all of the stuff you need for your documentary, and then you get Patrick McGoohan creates his own documentary and sends it to you. What were you thinking? Yes. What was your reaction? It was like, wait a minute, I was making a documentary, and all of a sudden he's basically making his own documentary and wants you to use it on Channel 4. I mean,
yeah, I that was a glorious moment. I mean, he only did that because he saw our rough cut and he hated it so much. I mean, he screamed at us for 18 hours across Paris with the veins standing out on the side of his neck. We got moved on from several cafes. We ended up somewhere on the Champs-Élysées, I seem to remember, at 4 a.m. in the morning, and he's still screaming at us, and it's been going on all day. And then we went back to the hotel, and he sort of asked me, he said, "What's your room number?" And I gave him my room number. I thought he was going to come up and get me. I sat on the bed waiting for him to come up and punch me. He didn't, actually. Anyway, so he sent his own documentary. So I was really excited about this because he used our same cameraman, and he went to all the same places. So it was a kind of nod to the fact that we had some of what we were doing was right. So I was very excited about it. I mean, I thought the interview was poor because it was one of his daughters had done it. Not Catherine. It wasn't Catherine. One of his daughters had done it. So it was a setup. And it didn't reveal very much, but it went kind of really mad at the end. It went like the end of The Prisoner itself, and I really loved all the mad stuff. Just fantastic. So I was very excited, and actually, I'm a nerd. I'm a fan. So to get something that Patrick McGoohan has directed arrive with your name on it, I just thought, how lucky am I? I mean, this is exciting. I mean, it was stupid, but I loved it just because he'd done it. And I thought, well, he's just having a laugh with us, and that's fine. We deserve it. I really wanted to use it, at least some of it. But at that point, he had. I never got what I guess in this country you call it a release form from him. He never signed off on our interview. So Channel 4 had to freeze the production because he hadn't made it quite clear he hadn't signed off on it, and he hadn't. It's my fault. So they froze the production, and we were kind of in a state of nothing happening. And so they said to us in no uncertain terms, you cannot use a frame of that because that would put us in a very difficult position legally. If we show any of his footage, he's got us. So you've got to actually ignore it, pretend you've never seen it, which is really painful. But that's it. We couldn't use it because we were in trouble. We were in serious trouble at that point.
Were you able to use it? I mean, watching In My Mind documentary, did you actually were able to take some of that his work and share it in that film?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is, what's horrible, I hate, there's so many things I hate, actually, but one thing I really hate are kind of archives. Somewhere there is a really good tape of that film, and Catherine doesn't have it, she's seen it, but she doesn't have it, she's given it her blessing, sort of, well, what else she's going to do, but it's vanished, so all we've got is this really, 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 really bad sort of third generation from a VHS shot off of television, transfer to DVD thing, which is almost unwatchable. It really annoys me. I've had people searching for it, and other people have had people searching for that tape. I don't know where it's gone. The production company don't seem to have it. The archive don't have it. It's a crime. And it'd be a real. That would have been, if nothing else, a fantastic DVD extra. His riposte to our film.
Yeah. And so what
but
was
it's not to be. I don't know where it's gone. I mean, it's I should have just walked away with that. I should have taken it. How many times you've done that in your life thinking, why don't I just walk out the office with that? Because no one else cares about that.
Right.
I mean, I keep doing it, though. I haven't learned. I just walk away with that. No, no one gives a shit.
Right.
And it would be nice to have it.
6 into 1 aired in 1983. What was the reception of the documentary?
I think it did really well. It got really good reviews. And when I'm feeling really low, and I think I'll look myself up on IMDb so I can get out of bed in the morning. It's the one film I was involved in. It's got the biggest vote, which is really crazy.
Yeah.
But no, it did really well. But it did really well because in those days you weren't allowed to do a traditional documentary. Channel 4 wouldn't allow it, so you could have no voiceover, you could have no presenter. The crazier it was, the better. So the context of it, it was supposed to be, the only reason it would have gotten made was to be really pretty out there. And it was pretty out there. And I think a lot of the prisoner community didn't like it because we got Patrick McGoohan. And why would you bother doing anything else? If you got Patrick McGoohan, just let him talk for an hour. Forget everything else. And but we were like, oh no, we're gonna be formally innovative and we're gonna do unusual stuff. And they were heady times, you just wanted to make your mark aesthetically, and that's stupid. Actually, we should have just won the interview. If it had been good enough, I might have, been tempted by that. But as you know, we had to do it several times over, and it was a sort of torture.
Right.
So I didn't feel it would have run uncut. So I think the prisoner community was kind of disappointed in a way because Pat was there, but he didn't get to say much. But other than that, it did really well. Luckily, it's been purchased now by a network who did the new movie, the new documentary, and they buried it in granite, which I'm very happy about. So it will never be seen. saved me some embarrassment.
I've seen a little bit of it, and I think some of the things were really creative. There was one part where you interviewed somebody, but he was almost interviewing himself. There was like two. It was like double of the same person.
I mean, that's the kind of shit, right? I mean, Pat Jackson, who directed Schizoid Man, which had two Patrick McGoohans, so we thought, why don't we just have two Pat Jacksons? I mean, it's kind of obvious, and it's kind of naive and nice and silly. It's all right. It's low on interpretation, I think. It's got some nice things about it, but I think it's too interested in itself, and it's not interested enough in the people in front of the camera.
Yeah.
I mean, Lewis Griefer, I think, was really good, and we reprised some of that stuff in the new documentary. And Lord Grey, that was almost as difficult getting an interview with him as it was with Pat. We only got it because Patrick McGoohan called him up to talk to these guys.
Nice.
So that's rare, and I'm quite proud of that, because even though he didn't have a lot to say, he's just like an adoring dad, really. Puffing away on his cigar.
Yeah.
Saying how much he loves Patrick McGoohan. He would have done anything. And believe me, he would have done anything.
Yeah.
Literally. Even though Patrick trashed his office, I think, at one point. I think when Gray didn't give him the money he wanted for something else, jumped on his desk and literally kicked the shit out of the entire office, and was very unkind, actually. Which is not nice, because Lou was his, couldn't have done anything without Lou. Just couldn't. We all need someone like Lou Gray to give us the money and give us the freedom. And
definitely.
You rarely get that. You mostly don't, actually. And Patrick did.
Nice. So in my mind, the prisoner community should be very happy. You get a lot of Patrick McGoohan in this film, and he talks about he mentions about how the prisoner was in he mentioned how most of the prisoner was really in his mind, and is that where the title comes from, or are you talking about your own?
The title. I like the title. It wasn't mine, actually. When Network approached me to do it, and they said, well, we want to call it In My Mind, which is good because, as you say, it was something that had been in Patrick's mind for years, and because he's more interested in the mind aspect of the series, he's not really that interested in the action. I mean, I think there are some perfunctory bits of action in the prison. It's not a lot. It's all right, just driving along some sand dunes in a mini-moke, a few punch-ups, nothing much. It was a mind thing for him. So I thought it was a good title, and also because in the best episode, Once Upon a Time, he does actually say to the number two, in my mind, you're the smart one. So that mind thing, of being in someone's mind, was something that came up a lot. So it was a good title, and I was lucky in a way that I was approached. I've repressed this thing for 35 years, like you do with bad work or like a shitty relationship or something like wrong. And they came to me and said, well, it's the 50th anniversary, and do you think you could revisit that footage? And I lied, and I said, yeah, sure. I mean, I didn't think this was possible. I said, yes, sure. Of course I can. Yeah, you're on. And that was a lie. I thought at some point I would jump. And they sent me the footage, and I watched it. It was painful looking at those rushes. They said they're quiet from the original production company. And they said, well, do you think? And I went, yeah, sure. And I was lying. I just kept lying and lying. Yes, I can do it. I know I can do it. Even when we went back to Port Marion to do the drone shots, I wasn't convinced. I was just going along thinking, when do I confess the fact that I don't think I can do this or that anything can be done? But luckily, weirdly, it sounds a bit Lynchian, but weirdly, I think he talks about Elephant Man in this respect. You wake up one morning, I think it's when he went to a hospital in Whitechapel, and he just got I think he describes the wind as normal. But I just woke up one morning and I could see a way through. But that was quite late in the process. I was bluffing. I thought, it's painful to look at. I don't want to be here. Why was I such a dick? Why did I mess it all up? But then you get it. You suddenly see a way through. Thank God. Or if you don't, you're in real trouble. And then it was kind of easy. And then it was really sort of pleasurable. I mean, I really enjoyed it. And I thought, actually, how often in your life do you get, someone came to you and said, that girlfriend or boyfriend you had 35 years ago, you screwed it up, how about you get another shot at that? What do you think? God, yeah, why couldn't you? So that thing I said that day, I could take that back and I could take it to Venice instead of to, some shitty whole place. You don't often get the chance to revisit your past and make amends, you know. And I thought, okay, this is really good. And although I am absolutely convinced that Patrick McGowan would have hated the new film as much as he hated the previous one, I mean, I would rely on that. I hope he wouldn't disappoint you. He'd still think it was shit.
Oh.
You know, it's not. So I'm you know, I knew he was right about the first one. I know he'd be wrong about the second one. As long as you know what it is, it's fine. But it was a rare opportunity. I'm so pleased they asked me, and that I managed to hide my lack of faith until the last minute, when suddenly it sort of all came good. Mostly.
It's really good. It's so good. You know, so I mean, you had the experience, then you had all those years to you know, get to the point where you could make this great documentary. If you could, what advice would you give your younger self about making a documentary?
Well, okay, I didn't know anything, so any advice would have been useful. I mean, for anyone who might even listen to this who's thinking of doing it, there are some things. I think some of them Patrick taught me, and I've never ever forgotten them. During that first interview, he screamed at me, and I must have been reading my next question. And he just exploded and said, "Don't do that. You know, I don't want to look up and see you looking down at your next question. I need you to look me in the eye, and I need you to listen to me. And this is a performance, and I'm going to perform, and you're the audience. So don't look at your fucking questions." I mean, he was quite, you know. So I have never ever done that in 35 years. I've never ever looked, you know, I mean, you have to work out a way of how either memorize them or keep them on idiot cards. But you know, if you're interviewing someone, do them the courtesy of looking them looking at them and listen to them. And that's the one thing I never knew that, and that was a painful lesson. Well, not painful. It was a good lesson. I've never ever forgotten it, and I've always behaved since then. Also, don't be frightened. You know, if I'm looking at a bad shot in a video assist, don't, just because you think you don't know anything, you can say, "Excuse me, I don't think that's right." I was nervous. I thought cameramen knew how to film things, and sound people knew how to record things, and directors knew how to direct. I at the time said, that looks shit. You know, what's going on? Can we not do that better? I never did, because I was intimidated. And also they were American. And, you know, I was a huge fan of American cinema and everything American, basically. Apart from the politics. And then, so I think that I wish I had had the confidence. So I don't know anything, but I reckon I know more than you, actually. Yeah. Because, I mean, 4 or 5 years later, I made a film about the German director Wim Wenders. I was still producing. I wasn't directing, and we drove into the Mojave Desert to get some shots, Paris, Texas type thingies, and we lost the director on the way. And I got stranded with the cameraman. You know, the light was going. We were in the desert. I thought, well, I'm actually going to have to direct this because there is no director. But I won't, because I'm very respectful. So I let the cameraman set up the shot, and I went and looked through the viewfinder. It was crap. I mean, it was the shittiest shot I've ever seen. So I just say, well, can't we just put the camera, you know, put it over there? At least, you know, there's a diner in the corner, you know what I mean? So you've got to have the confidence to think, even if you think you don't know anything, if you've got half an eye, and don't be intimidated by technicians who tend to try and mystify everything. Yeah. Of course they do. It's their job, you know.
That's good advice.
Unfortunately, there's no mystery about directing. I can't make that sound mysterious.
Right.
You know, you just turn up and tell people what to do and go home. There's nothing really, you know, there's nothing too mysterious about that, except in the hands of David Lynch. But that's another thing.
You know, that's good advice. It's real good advice. You know, I also want to comment that, you know, in some of your documentaries, you're the narrator, and I think that you really sell your documentaries. I really love your voice. I love the way you kind of go into the story and stuff, and I think that's really special. I know I got to check out a few of your documentaries. Like, oh, you're the narrator again, and it's a wonderful thing.
I have to say, like most things, that only began as a kind of economic necessity. I did a feature-length film called The Joy of Easy Listening, which is about easy listening music, which was a kind of polemic, like you thought the stuff was rubbish, but actually it's really, really interesting. And I had an actor in mind who I'd never voiced a film before, and I had an actor in mind who I wanted to do, Anthony Edge, who was in Buffy's Vampire Slayer, British guy who just came up. He just had a very seductive, deep, lovely voice, and he's in a coffee advert, and he was the kind of, you know, where he started. He wanted too much money, and I didn't have the budget, so, and then I couldn't find anybody. And then my executive producer said, well, why don't you do it? You've written the script, you do it. And I didn't really want to do it. But then I have to say, since then, I've done it a few times, and I've grown to kind of appreciate it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you get someone's really good, and they sort of screw it up. They're not, you think, why didn't I read it myself? I think I know how that's supposed to be done.
Yeah.
So not all the time, but sometimes. There was no choice on in my mind. There had to be, because that was just a sort of horrible first person.
It was a personal story, too. It was your story. So, yeah. And one of the documentaries I saw that you did, I like, too. What are these small records? What are they called? I mean, like the small...
45?
No, it's a single? Is it just...
It's a single.
It's a single.
45.
Yeah. So, I mean, Chris did a documentary on that, and it was so cool. I think back in the day, I had a single, probably like The Greatest American Hero or something like that TV show. But it's like, oh, what a fascinating documentary. And you were telling the story, and I just liked that. Really, it was really something.
So that's really, actually, just saying that was reminding me that it absolutely proves I wasn't interested in anything other than television and music. The very first 45 I actually bought was a theme song for a TV show.
Yeah.
I was very young, and it was from a TV show called The Human Jungle, which was about a psychoanalyst, of all things, played by Herbert Lom. It was shot in black and white on British television. I think maybe John Barry had written it, hopefully, genius. Someone like John, someone that good. And it was, I used to buy TV scenes because, in the day when, way back then, no VCRs, you had to have a reel-to-reel tape recorder. It was so primitive.
Yeah.
And capture something that you had enjoyed and replay it. You couldn't do it. You just couldn't do it. Things didn't get repeated. So I recorded whole shows on reel-to-reel tape recorders just to listen. So at least I had the audio. And there was when your guys landed on the moon, in this year, in 69, over here they had a show, and Pink Floyd did a kind of quite smart piece of programming. They got Pink Floyd into the studio to play a soundtrack live to this event. Gobsmacking to think that happened. Of course, the BBC being absolute top of the list arseholes have wiped that tape. They wipe a lot of their television all the time. So they wiped that show. But I got a recording on reel-to-reel of Pink Floyd in the studio playing. So at least I got the audio of it.
That's awesome.
It's called off a mic in my living room with people making tea and shit, but in the background. But you had to do that, just record
I love
it. Telly.
That's awesome. That's so cool.
Fantastic performance. Rick Wright, God bless him, God rest his soul, the organist. It was mostly him on sort of on vibraphones. Absolutely dreamy and beautiful. Fantastic piece of music.
That's so
fantastic.
Cool. In my mind, you got to interview McGowan's daughter, Catherine, for the documentary. And was there anything new you discovered about Patrick McGowan and the prisoner through talking with her?
So this is funny because I didn't interview her. Network said we don't really have the money to. We've got to go out there anyway because we've got to do lots of business. We should take it. We're just going to interview Catherine, but we're going to do it. So I gave them all the questions. I felt a bit missed. I didn't get to go. So I gave him all the questions. The guy called Tim Beddoes, who runs Network, he actually did the interview with her, which is very good. I would say that's good. So I didn't until he got back. I mean, I gave him my cameraman and everything. I told I set it all up pretty much. So I didn't see that until he came back. So it was interesting to me. It was interesting. The more I looked at it, where she was very tactful, the points at which she was very tactful, and as you would expect a daughter to be of a father, who can't have been an interesting and easy guy to live with, and where she teared up. I think where you see, if you see something over and over on the kind of in the edit suite, where people start to, they're trying not to cry, she tries not to cry most seriously when she's talking about him playing Eeson's band, and you can tell that fearsome character is her father, and that the more she talks about the performance, the more she gets, she has to stop herself from getting too upset. So that was. But interesting. Then I did meet her. The documentary premiered on September 29 up in Port Merion, and they made a 35mm print of it, and it was all very kind of lavish. And she flew over. So I basically shit myself that night. She was there. She hadn't seen it. She hadn't seen a frame of it.
Wow.
I wanted to show her some of it, but network said, no, we can't do that because we can't involve her in the process. And he was right. But she hadn't seen anything. So there it is. It's kind of like, it was like midnight. No, it wasn't quite right. It was late. And on the evening of the 28th, and the actual day of the 29th. And I was, I just got drunk, and I kind of had loads of drugs. I had taken a lot. I didn't have any except booze, was all I had. And I thought, well, what's she thinking? What the hell's going on in there? And she loved it. But that was a bit, that was difficult because we just didn't know. And I think she loved it. She said she loved it. So, and I was, it was just huge relief all around. Not that she could have effectively done anything, but it's nice to know. And she agreed with me that her dad would almost certainly hate it as much as the other one, which was nice. But yeah, he would have probably walked out.
Well, I'm so...
I've been in touch with her since. We sort of keep in touch. And whenever I do an event, I sort of say, so it's nice. I mean, I've often kind of thought, you get all these horrible rumors about there's going to be a movie version. First, it's going to be Mel Gibson. Gibson's company. We're going to do a movie version because I think maybe because of Braveheart and doing this, so good in that. I don't know. And then I think the latest rumor is Ridley Scott, which just fills me with horror. That he'll do some movie. I mean, I've had when I saw her in Port Merion, I thought, well, that's the clue to me. And I think what we have is it's you now. It's you. It's a woman. She wakes up in a place, maybe here, maybe not here, and she's kind of got this DNA in her, this horrible DNA from this crazy guy. I haven't quite worked out in my head, but I would love to do. I mean, she is an actor, and I think she's quite good, actually, and it would be great to kind of a nice frisson there if she sort of played a part that was a bit similar to that, knowingly. Something nice, like down the years, And we'll get to it. It's like, if an actor says, "I'll see you in 25 years," and then you see them in 25 years, you can't help it. It's just you're there, right? I mean, it's just like
right.
That kind of resonance and that kind of baggage it always pays off. Never doesn't.
United States has not gotten the 50th anniversary of the Blu-ray, and I was so disappointed. Part of the reason I was disappointed is I said, I wasn't going to get to see your documentary, and I was so happy when I realized it was available by itself to rent and then buy, and so I'm so happy about that. I still want the 50th anniversary Blu-ray, and I'm hoping eventually it will come to the United States.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, it's. I've made. I don't know how many documentaries, but they've pretty much all exclusively been for television, so they've never had that afterlife. They get shown, they might get repeated, but they're not. It's not like Lynch on Lynch or Cronenberg on Cronenberg. They don't exist on a shelf. That's what's quite nice about it. It's something is physically in the world. It's not just in the airwaves and the TV channels decide they've got they've got a hole in the schedule and they're going to repeat it. It won't cost them any extra money. So it's nice. It was nice to do something that was. I don't think it'll ever be shown on television, actually. Apparently it's too niche, according to most telly channels, or all the telly channels. So it only will ever exist as a kind of DVD and some limited theatrical stuff. Yeah. But it's nice, though, for once.
Thank you so much, Chris, for your time.
Pleasure. Great pleasure. Take care.
Thank you, Becks. Thank you, Eeson. And a big thank you to Chris Rodley for being on today's show. Today was an amazing show.
It was really cool. It was something a little different we did. I really loved The Prisoner. I mean, I loved it from back in college. I found out about it through my love of Twin Peaks. I found out, hey, here's another crazy show to watch and stuff. So it's cool that we got a show to kind of talk a little bit about about The Prisoner.
Yeah, so cool. And I will definitely watch The Prisoner Ben. You guys have.
You gotta watch the first episode, and you gotta watch. I think it's really like 2 last episodes at least, and you get a good sense of the show. But there's only 17 episodes, so it's not that much to watch.
Yeah, it's not much. So I will definitely check that out this summer. If you have a suggestion for a guest, a topic, or just want to say hi, send us an email at twinpeaksunwrapped@gmail.com. Like us on Facebook, follow us on the old Twitter, and feel free to leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. Leave us a nice little comment. Subscribe to us. We're on YouTube. Subscribe. Google Play, Spotify, wherever your fine podcast can be found. We are there.
So
do the theme song. Do the theme song.
Wait, Ben, ready?
Secret Agent Man.
You sing it. And you.